How far would you go for your friends? Would you cross the 7 seas or battle against a mighty dragon? Would you face off against the ranks of the strongest military force across the globe? And would you burn down the embodiment of the whole world, all to protect those close to you? For these two, it's no more of a question than it is a prompt. And because with your help, we managed to reach that near impossible 1,000 subscriber goal in less than a month, it's finally time to give you that fabled matchup we've been hinting at for so long now. The face-off between two gods of sun and flame. Legends of shonen who walk the line between good and evil. All for the sake of their friends, followers, and newfound family above all else. But even as someone who has covered both of these characters in dedicated full-length videos on the channel before, as both my knowledge and general power scaling metas for these two have developed, this duo of absolute unruly powerhouses have only begun to inch closer and closer in strength over the prior months. So I won't keep you guessing any longer. If you're ready to kick back and relax with a cold drink in hand, I'll give you the complete breakdown on every single facet of Straw Hat versus Salamander. Now, to begin, because both these characters hail from series that are notoriously controversial in terms of their overall power scaling, it should be pretty clear that almost any and every interpretation I could possibly give is gonna cause somebody out there to burn with the seething rage of Hades for the potential downplay of their favorite franchise. So, keeping in mind that these two, for the most part, fit nicely into the mold of generic face-punching shonen fighters with an otherwise pretty limited set of hacks even among the casts of their own series, we're gonna focus mostly on the raw stats here today, giving as many interpretations as I personally know to paint the fullest picture for you guys, but I'll still mention abilities when they become important. Since we've got quite a bit of new stuff to talk about for both though, let's just start with Monkey D. Luffy. As following his time in the Wano arc, after achieving the complete power of the Sun God Nika, getting an off-screen pre-raid training amp, and advancing his haki to all new heights, at the absolute lowest, a post-Kaido fight Luffy should be in the 10 to the 28 joules tier of strength, or multi-continental as a baseline. For anyone confused about that number, just think of this to the 28 part here like a general power level, since this video is going to use plenty more big numbers like that, and we know neither you nor me care about the sciencey neckbeard explanation behind them as much as we do the face punching that occurs due to them. But yes, at the very worst, Luffy upscales massively from the likes of Don Chinjiao, who could split a continent made of ice in two, as well as a casual Aokiji who could freeze massive chunks of the sea with just one hand, on top of just blatantly being in the same league of power as his other Yonko rivals, such as Old Whitebeard who could shake the entire One Piece world and threaten to destroy it with earthquakes, or even potentially scaling to people like Garp to some extent who could outright one-shot the prior Chinjiao. This multi-continental baseline is very consistent with other top-tier Emperor-level powerhouses as well, who are constantly portrayed to have the ability to split the skies and cause volcanic eruptions with their basic attacks, as well as narratively scaling off the likes of the ancient weapons, which are constantly referred to as planet-destroying, and you can even literally just calc the Bajrang gun in the anime to somewhere around that aforementioned 10 to the 28 level. No matter how much you love or hate the series, this level of power is clearly intended and supported by all things within the story, ranging from guides to statements and even a bevy of other lower tier feats which countless characters dramatically upscale from, be that 10 to the 20 tsunami slicing or just smashing up entire islands and mountain ranges on the regular. You'd have to be a literal Neanderthal stuck back in like 2012 or 2013 to still be pushing any sort of agenda for One Piece top tiers any lower than this. So as a baseline, Luffy's level of general strength scaling or attack potency should start right here. But the contention that arises after you arrive at such a simple baseline is where to next. Many a One Piece fan would desperately claim that Luffy possesses world-shattering power in the same vein as his big three brothers, if not perhaps even higher, using these statements from before. Yet in terms of actual showings, unlike Bleach, Naruto, or most other shonen series, Luffy, and One Piece as a whole, is in the odd position of lacking feats, since despite its long runtime, One Piece is a particularly slow and oftentimes non-linear story, in terms of its power progression at least, with arcs like Marineford and Whole Cake Island showing off these Yonko-level characters long before Luffy had any business trying to deal with them. But in the eyes of a rabid power scaler, those important, well-crafted narrative implications will do little more than serve as an annoying eyesore to be death of the authored away almost as soon as a debate begins. So if you were just trying to get Luffy a little higher up the food chain, or maybe want to glance at his less consistent feats and scaling, there are many people who claim that due to this panel of Zoro saying Luffy and his crew grow stronger on their adventures from island to island, coupled with the use of calc stacking being applied to Luffy's many forms and hockey multipliers, the Straw Hat crew and any relevant characters should hypothetically be growing exponentially just from being around in the story. If you buy into this idea of massive power creep being present throughout One Piece, or even just the use of calc stacking on its own, to possibly suggest that characters like Katakuri, Doflamingo, and others are supposedly massively surpassed by even fodders in the story every other arc or so, then using this mistranslated 10 times multiplier for Gear 2 statement, as well as some interesting highball takes on the Marineford incident, you could say Luffy is as high as 10 to the 30, 31, and even 32, which would all be much higher than before, with the types of individuals who claim this often working hand in hand with another group of scalers to support it, the One Piece Big Earthers, who, just like real-world flat earthers, believe in this theory that the One Piece planet is far bigger than our regular Earth, and will both live and die by the mantra that we must use their estimations as canon, trying to gauge the world's actual scale through a variety of methods, such as Marco's 10 to 20 million island estimate, this globe on Ohara that has 3 moons, or the God-forsaken river. Now, while I won't have any part of trying to tell you why this should be canon until it's actually legitimized, I bring this up because when looked at in conjunction with the power creep meta I mentioned before, there's actually some surprising consistency to be found in this method of scaling. For example, a higher-end interpretation of Luffy's Bajrang gun suggests that the decompression done just by Luffy's fist alone during the time frame of this attack hitting Kaido's face in the anime would have to calc out to around 10 to the 30 joules, like the prior stacking estimates might suggest, before even adding the hockey multipliers or things of that sort. Which is maybe even sort of backed up by the idea of Oldbeard's Quakes being upscaled to this now larger planet, also calcing out to about 10 to the 29 for a magnitude 6 lower ball estimate. So keeping all that in mind, Luffy's hypothetical power level should be, at a most realistic, fair estimate, 10 to the 28, with higher, more pixel-scaly, fanboyish interpretations reaching those low 10 to the 30 ranges. And the absolute highest you could possibly get him through adding multipliers to the most massive big planet fan scales, suggesting One Piece Earth is star-sized or any other ridiculous nonsense of that sort, would be right around 10 to the 37 through 10 to the 40, if you're willing to make leaps in logic so gigantic that you would escape the gravity of said big Earth by even thinking them. But on the opposite end, going all the way back to the Neanderthal from 2013, since you all sat through the boring numbers part, let's talk about the part of Luffy's kit that has changed the most in recent years, his Devil Fruit, the mythical Zoan type Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. A magical fruit Luffy consumed as a child that stripped him of his ability to swim, but in return granted him a power so zany, wacky, and outright cartoonish that its scaling became almost as controversial as the big worlder nonsense from before. with some people out there still genuinely believing that all Luffy can do is make people look a little goofy, while others think he's just straight up omnipotent Bugs Bunny levels of strong now. However, fortunately for you, outside of the obligatory stat increase it gave Luffy, which we already covered, the 5 Elders, Kaido, and even this little extra publication here all tell us that Luffy is clearly no longer the Paramecia Rubberman he was initially made out to be, but instead someone who has inherited the power of a god, who once had a body with properties similar to that of rubber. This is a very important distinction because it plays into those abilities of Nika being granted the freedom to fight however he fancies. Since rather than having said typical Paramecia awakening abilities that allow their user to turn the world around them into their element, which is where the idea of Luffy just turning his enemies into funny looking versions comes from, Luffy's Devil Fruit in reality canonically doesn't do that and instead turns him into what could be seen as a rubber hose man, granting him the power of classic Tom and Jerry-esque Toon Force, just to a much, much lower extent. This is because, as Oda, Outside Material, and Vegapunk have all explained, the Sun God Nika has the power to bend the laws of reality to do and create whatever he imagines that would make other people feel joy or laughter. So while yes, this technically does extend to letting Luffy apply his rubbery attributes to his surroundings and enemies to make them look a little goofy, this is honestly more of just a happy little coincidence than his main power, as the Nika hacks go so much farther than that, which we've seen on full display in the manga, with Luffy doing outright ridiculous things like making his arms and the air around him spontaneously combust, turning his hair into sunglasses, or manipulating the shape of his own body completely, or even restarting his own heart when he got tired. So rather than just being the very stretchy, resilient guy we knew him as for almost 25 years, Luffy's casually pulling up to any fight with divine Hanna-Barbera inspired powers of low-level reality warping, which even we really still don't know the full extent of, as only one power in the entire world of One Piece has ever been shown to rein in the most ridiculous in the world, which is Haki, the physical embodiment of a person's will, and the main power system within One Piece. As Kaido, Rayleigh, and many others have said, with characters like Shanks, Roger, Zoro, and Mihawk all to back it up as living proof, on every single level, Haki mastery is mandatory to be a top dog. You literally can't be a One Piece top tier in any tier without it. So as you'd imagine, among all the characters in One Piece, Luffy's Haki mastery is among the highest in the whole series, as not only does he have all 3 types, but he's advanced them all to their currently known limit. While we did already touch on the stat buffs of Armament Hardening and Conqueror's Coding in the AP section of this video, since these abilities are in effect just power multipliers, bundled with a secondary effect of projecting spiritual Haki energy straight into someone's organs for the sake of bypassing armors or resistances, the defensive properties of this sort of energy projection are still useful enough in niche circumstances to mention, since they allow the user to land or block attacks without physical contact, which, as we've seen against a fire user, can't be an understated advantage. But really, the biggest factor for Haki here is of course going to be Luffy's most underrated power-up in the series, Future Sight. This is an advanced application of observation Haki, a form of precognition which Luffy could already use to predict and dodge high-speed objects, that was then evolved to let the user not only see the actual future, but a slowed down Spider Sense-esque version of it. To explain it more simply, Luffy could basically predict attacks with observation Haki, but upon awakening it, he could see the literal events that would happen in slow-mo before they even occurred, no prediction required. We see the difference in combat speed between someone who has and does not have Future Sight put onto full display in the Whole Cake Island arc, where Katakuri is able to last an entire 12-hour-long marathon fight, as well as a following escape scene, without ever being hit a single time as long as the power was active, ignoring the sole exception of another Future Sight user squaring off with him. So all that said, it should be pretty clear that with Luffy having even better Haki than the aforementioned Kot, the boosts Future Sight provide to someone's effective combat speed, when even compared to more common forms of precog, can't be understated. However, unfortunately, mentioning speed, I do have to finally get back into the numbers and calcs for a bit to give you a good idea of how effective such an ability would be, since just like strength, it's more than a little contentious to ask how fast is Luffy. But for an easy enough baseline method, just like before, Luffy fought Kizaru, a man made of literal light, who also had access to this insane perception boosting future sight haki, yet Luffy could outspeed and tag him many times before winning or tying their clash, depending on who you ask. Ignoring all the other context, this would make Luffy at least FTL pretty undeniably, but you can definitely get him much higher, considering a big part of Luffy's combat skill has always been his speed, even more so than his strength, which is a weird underlying little tidbit we constantly hear about in the story, watching Luffy be fast enough to dodge and tag characters like Dofi, Kot, and Kaido, while still lacking the physical power to harm them, as Dofi even straight up says as much right here, which can support the notion that Luffy is indeed a bit of a speedster in his own verse. So by using the same calc stacking, pixel scaling concept from before, as well as even the mistranslated French data book again possibly, you could multiply Luffy's speed to easily high FTL ranges via saying he's much faster than characters like Marco, Sanji, or even his own start of time skip self, who all have their own set of light speed pixel calcs and feats. But if you're looking for the most devious and smooth brain speed scale to go along with your main course of Big Earther scaling, then you could take this same exact logic to the extreme, pointing to the sweet, gentle Kuma who's been on Team Straw Hat since day one, who has stated light speed attacks right here, and then assuming that this kind soul had nothing but violence on his mind when he attacked a tired, defenseless pre-time skip Zoro, then as long as you say that these are moving at their full light speed potential, which Zoro was able to partially evade, you then have an easy 50% the speed of light feet for a base injured pre-time skip Zoro. With Luffy himself just recently claiming an egghead that he and his crew were over 100 times stronger since that point, as well as all the math stuff sort of supporting figures way higher than that estimate. And because Zoro is slower than Sanji and both should still be slower than a base Luffy back then, you can easily get over 1,000 times the speed of light or MFTL pretty easy, without ever mentioning things like 3D2Y's 100 times light speed calc for base Luffy, or higher multipliers for his forms or haki. So just keep in mind that One Piece really likes to play fast and loose with its speed scaling, and that Luffy is minimum FTL, with higher ends casually reaching those FTL plus or MFTL ranges. But with all that on the table for you now, all you need to remember is that Luffy is in this 10 to the 28 through 10 to the 32 ballpark, with those easy FTL and beyond speeds, and of course, casual imagination hacks. This though is only one side of the matchup. And to ignore the many advantages of Fairy Tail's finest just to make this matchup lean in popular favor would be a disservice to both him and his series. So for the Salamander, I think things should begin with the same starting point scale to justify where Natsu and his potential power creep can take him. However, it is important to note that unlike Luffy, who really only showed a small disparity between his Haki-infused base and Gear 5 Nika forms, literally just fighting Kaido evenly in both, with hacks being the biggest discernible difference between the two fights, Natsu scales wildly different in his many forms, with his base state ironically getting the Goku treatment as it was completely power cliffed out of viability during the 100-year quest. So because of that, I'll say right now, base Natsu during his time in the 100-year quest should only be around the same level as the Spriggans, give or take, with each of them scaling to the Aetherion Blast, a country-destroying weapon, which Wall, a member of the Spriggans, was able to recreate with his magical power. And while there's at least 2 different ways to scale this Aetherion Blast, all you really need to know right now is that base Natsu, despite having the occasional wild outliers, such as briefly hanging with Akno or base Seraph, is all but confirmed to be no sort of threat to any top tiers in the Fairy Tail cast. with the dragon god Alderaan saying outright that one of Natsu's attacks was roughly equal to 1 point of damage on him relative to a total health pool of 100 million. With Alderaan in effect being the weakest of the fairy tale god tiers, likely losing to Acnologia, Ignia, Selene, and possibly a few others. Yet Natsu, again specifically in just his base form, wasn't even close to his level, and can sort of just get flicked away by him or many others on that upper echelon of the fairy tale power scale. However, as a part of awakening his own Dragon Slayer power set to the fullest, Natsu would eventually begin to master his self-activated version of Dragon Force and merge it with his own Flame Dragon King mode to reach a new, far more competitive height. And while I will get into the exacts of how those flames work a little later, you can sort of tell the night and day difference between this attack and this attack. I mean, good lordy, Natsu's Purgatory secret art literally sent that same giant, casually continent-shaking dragon straight to an early grave. And if you know anything about Natsu, this is no surprise, as with full access to his power of friendship nonsense, there's zero reason to assume Natsu isn't at least close to a top 5 character in the verse. Being hyped up by almost everyone in the cast, from other mages to the first Dragon King Igniel, his son Ignia, Zeref, and even Acnologia himself, as a mysterious, nigh unstoppable force of nature who makes massive leaps to surpass those around him, no matter the arc or circumstance. At least when it's narratively convenient, that is. Hence how Natsu can canonically both defeat the strongest villain in Fairy Tail's history and still somehow be weaker than Urza in his usual base mode. It's never made explicitly clear if this is because of Natsu's demon biology as a creation of the Book of Zeref, or simply just some other quirk of his magic power, but what's certainly clear after all my ramblings is that Dragon Force Natsu's real starting baseline should go much higher than just the Etherion canon. So how strong are the Fairy Tail God tiers? Fortunately for us, Hiro Mashima has come out on many occasions to place the level of Natsu's strongest opposition, the Dragon Gods, near the level of base Acnologia, and by proxy, Igniel. So we have a solid, definable link between both parts of the Fairy Tail manga to easily say that at a bare minimum, Natsu should be multi-continental. Even being really uncharitable to Fairy Tail, there are countless feats in the series that make it undeniable, from base Seraph scaling to the world-destroying Phoenix, Animus absorbing the Dragon Cry, a weapon equal to dozens of Etherion blasts, or even just the Dragon God's own individual feats, such as flipping the world's oceans, or the aforementioned continent-shaking steps of Alderaan. It all sort of supports the notion of multi-continental without the use of any pixel scaling, calc stacking, or out-of-narrative assumptions, and would even still sort of be on the somewhat casual side of Natsu's full power, as the likes of a human Zeref and Animus would have little to no chance of defeating a Dragon God, scaling more so to their casual feats of just walking around or existing, whereas Natsu can actually match these Dragon Gods at their full power to some extent, despite the fact that Zeref and Animus still have those same sort of world-shaking powers as an Oldbeard. So, for a reason you'll understand way too much in a bit, I'd say Natsu should at a bare minimum be at 10 to the 29. But what if we were a little more charitable, giving Natsu the same pixel scaling calc stacking treatment? And for any math nerds out there, it probably stuck out to you that I mentioned 10 to the 29 as Natsu's quote-unquote power level for this video, since that's very specifically defined as moon level. Now, with that phrase uttered out into the world, the Fairy Tail fans watching this video now shiver with utter delight and glee as they prepare to show you their favorite calc, Selene's really big moon. So, for those who don't know, Selene is this dragon lady right here, and she's the dragon god of the moon, who, after flexing her power a little bit, could alter the size of this circle in the sky from regular moon size to this. Now, just like the Big Earth or One Piece, this relies on a lot of assumptions made by counting the exact number of pixels, which can be changed, scrunched, or otherwise transformed in the process of turning this digital art to paper. However, if you want to grant it, no different than One Piece, who reaches those mid 10 to the 30s, by calcing just how big Selene could make a regular moon using her raw magical power, you get anywhere from the low 10 to the 30s all the way up to 10 to the 34 joules of raw GBE. And while yes, this is sort of a stupid calc that requires a lot of benefit of the doubt, such as no changes in density, that creation must inherently equal destruction, or even that this all wasn't just connected to the fact that Selene is the literal moon god, if you do still choose to keep on the outlier train of thought though, we can also use the canon distance from Magnolia to Hargan, 370 kilometers, on an equally pixel-scaled map, to say the biggest country here, the Paragrand Kingdom, is over 26,000 kilometers wide, justifying a single Etherion blast being a casual 10 to the 27 scale, which can then be multiplied by 96 as the highest number that is still referred to as dozens in the English dictionary, to then get Animus all the way up to a 10 to the 29 scale of his own, with Zeref and others potentially scaling even higher using statements like SPT Acno's destroy the world statement a bit more literally, which can make all of this highball meta a bit more digestible. And of course, to give it the briefest, and I really do mean briefest mention, there are a subsect of fairy tale fans, just like One Piece Big Earthers, who will go out of their way to claim star, solar system, and even universal level feats from a handful of outliers within the series, and especially within the anime filler arc, Eclipse Celestial Spirits. So for the universal stuff, the two major arguments for it that I want to address are Ultir creating supposedly infinite multiverses, and Zeref deleting existence with the Fairy Heart, as they just aren't super usable or consistent by any metric. Ultir's feat is simply just a case of fans not knowing how to read context, as Ultir just creates magic orbs that represent potential possible futures in her own words. This is not some sort of Gurren Lagann, fully fledged scalable universe being chucked at Natsu. It's just an unquantifiable way to explain her time magic, and this explanation lines up way more with the fact that she can't even rewind the main fairy tale timeline for more than a few seconds without sacrificing her entire lifespan. And as for Fairy Heart Zeref, honestly, I really don't think he's even too worth addressing, since Natsu only really beat him due to his END powers, tampering with the Book of Zeref, and maybe love. But regardless, Zeref is almost 100% above Acnologia and by proxy the Dragon Gods, who Natsu has only ever matched or bested under specific Dragon God nerfing circumstances, so consistently Natsu isn't really on his level without hacks or plot intervention, even ignoring the fact that this universal erasure he was going to perform is indeed just the hacks that probably doesn't even correlate with AP at all, created specifically through infinite magic and unlimited control of space-time, which could even be argued to have just been restarting Earth's timeline only as opposed to all of reality, which would nerf the feat a lot. But of course, to still give a more fair counterpart for our smooth brain One Piece Big Earther calcs, in that anime filler arc we mentioned before, which is, debatably referenced in the manga continuity and confirmed by Mashima to be something he worked on a little bit, we can get a variety of feats from the Celestial Spirit world, up to and including the Celestial Spirit King himself straight up threatening to destroy his entire realm, full of these potential stars and galaxies. And while characters like Natsu probably still don't scale to the full Celestial Spirit King's debatable universal claims, since no one within the manga ever faces him at full power, since anytime we've ever actually seen him in battle, he was capped at whatever level of strength Lucy summons him to, as we know Celestial Spirits scale up to their summoner's own magical output, backed up pretty comfortably by Lucy's summons staying useful well into the 100-year quest. But what Natsu does 100% scale to, and likely far above, are his actual feats in this arc, which most significantly include merging together the 12 worlds, which are planet or star-esque pocket dimensions contained within the Celestial Spirit realm. And if you're really charitable with just how big these realms can be, this calc is ranging all the way into the low 10 to the 40s, and is maybe even sort of supported as consistent when keeping in mind the idea of even fodder pre-time skip characters having outliers as crazy as a 10 to the 30 black hole from Blue Note. So you could honestly say very easily that a full-powered Natsu not only surpassed his form from this arc, but did so by the same ridiculous logical leaps and bounds as Big Earther calcs would suggest for Luffy, making the comparison pretty apt in my eyes. But on God, you waited through the most toxic and contentious section of this whole video, so you've earned yourself a long overdue break. Back to the fun stuff. Since it's time for me to explain Natsu's powers and abilities, which fortunately for us, are at least a little more straightforward than Luffy's reality warping. Except that's obviously a lie, it's fairy tale, nothing is ever straightforward here. But anyways, the biggest thing in Natsu's toolkit, aside from just straight hands, is his Fire Dragon Slayer magic, a secret magic lost to time, giving Natsu nearly complete control over fire, which he can create from his body and consume for conversion into raw magical power. This magic power is the power system of the world of Fairy Tail, which he can then reuse to produce a powerful burst of flame like a dragon, or repurpose it as a way to code his attacks in a similar vein to Luffy's Haki. But if this fire just behaved like any other normal old blaze though, Natsu wouldn't really be seen like the iconic anime powerhouse he is today. While the sorts of powers attributed to Natsu and his flames often vary, whether due to inconsistencies in the plot or Natsu's own ever-evolving power level, it's still pretty clear that at the very least, Natsu's magical fire can be physically molded into whatever shape he needs, it can replicate the magic powers of flames he's eaten in the past, it can be merged with the attribute of lightning, even if it wouldn't help against Luffy much, and most importantly, his flames on a number of occasions have burned through other magics, spirits, and even potentially concepts, depending on how hyper-literal you are with certain statements. The most obvious case of Natsu burning these three things all at once is during his fight with Zeref, where his flames are stated to be eating away at Natsu's own soul in an attempt to power them up enough for the sake of burning through Zeref's magic, or perhaps the manipulated concept of time itself, as some would imply Zeref is saying right here. In my opinion, the guild tampering with the Book of Zeref is what actually granted Natsu this last-ditch ability to possibly defeat or burn through the magic of someone who might even surpass his current prime, which can honestly be backed up by him burning lots of other magical attacks in the series, as opposed to him just deleting certain concepts from existence, which we never see him do again. But if you disagree and just take Zeref's statement at literal face value, it's fine to think Natsu can actually melt concepts like space or time. The end results won't really be affected that much since this isn't an AP feat as much as it is a hacks feat. However, whether it's due to his demon biology as END, his dragon powers, or anything else, Natsu, to some extent, should still be able to negate the uses of certain powers by burning them away. And interestingly enough, there is at least one more important feature to note that is commonly shared among all Dragon Slayers: enhanced biology. While not necessarily amping every trait to the maximum, it's very common that these superhuman Dragon Slayers, through practicing their magic, begin to adopt biology more and more similar to an actual dragon, eventually granting them super resilient scales and even full dragon forms. In Natsu's case though, he's still stuck with just the scales. However, his ability to manifest them came long after his other highly developed draconic buffs, such as his sense of smell and perception, which were both bolstered to the point that it even causes him severe motion sickness if he ever finds himself on a vehicle. No exceptions. And although it's not quite exactly on the level of true precog, since we've seen Dragon Slayers like Cobra use the more traditional sensory-based precog before, Natsu has still on a couple of occasions precisely broken down exact attacking patterns and motions on a mathematical, near PhD level, pretty casually. This finally does beg the question of numbers again though, as how else could we really gauge the effectiveness of Natsu's enhanced senses, especially in comparison to Luffy without knowing his speed. So for that, it's once again pretty simple. Fairy Tail, similar to One Piece, has a variety of very casual relativistic to light speed feats over the course of its run. From Urza slashing this meteor to Sting's white breath, Gajil's overhyped pixel calc, and dragons flying across the globe, all of these feats can individually be brought up to this relativistic scale without any multipliers, giving you enough variety to basically get anyone you want in this whole series to those sub-light speeds. So to say Natsu is around light speed after having multiple power-ups and multipliers above all these people is an easy, safe bet. But if we were to do the same things as posed for Luffy, we can easily scale Natsu off his own laser dodging feat, Haku's lightspeed statement, or Selene's feat of blitzing someone relative to Haku, and no matter which of these methods you choose to take, it's very easy to say that with calc stacking, multipliers, or just general power clipping especially, that Natsu should definitely scale to tens of times FTL. However, just like with One Piece, I have to go back to being room temperature IQ for a bit to try and give you the next few calcs. Since if you do believe magic power should scale entirely linearly, and there can be no variation in speed or power based on physicals, as well as relying again on those inconsistent pixel calcs, then either the use of pre-time skip Gajil's lightning dodge feat, which is at 2% the speed of light, or Blue Note's FTL black hole, we can easily apply mini training, time skip, and power-up amps to it to stack far into light speed, well before the second time skip, let alone the 100-year quest, which is still ignoring any arguments for spells like Lightspeed Fairy Glitter or Time Manipulation, that Natsu should, in all likelihood, also scale to or above to some extent. But now, after a lot of talking, we're finally here. Just remember, Natsu should be in that 10 to the 29 range if you're being fair, with possible highballs going all the way into 10 to the 34 if you're big on those pixel calcs, and don't mind ignoring the context a bit, while also having speed likely around or slightly faster than light. He also has access to magic flames, known for eating through other magic. With all the information I've thrown at you though, across a variety of different thought processes, scales, and interpretations, here are just my thoughts on the matchup. As you can see on the screen right now, ordered from most consistent to least consistent, these are the general scales we presented for both Luffy and Natsu. And seeing the numbers side by side, one thing becomes pretty clear, especially the more you move up these ladders. Natsu's best strength showings seem to go a bit higher across the board, whereas Luffy's speed showings seem to be a bit faster in general. However, hopefully we can all agree these ridiculous final tiers are both silly, over-dramatized representations of the matchup, which I only put here to show you my point about their stats, so let's go ahead and get rid of them. Keeping these mid and highball metas in mind though, there really aren't too many other matchups where the numbers work out this perfectly. Since while both characters have almost the exact same tools in their kit, be that a mix of strong hands, heightened senses, something to boost physical durability, and even power negation, one thing firmly separates them. Because on the one hand, you have Natsu, who could debatably use his Dragon Slayer flames to burn through the effects of Luffy's Nika hacks or Haki, as well as likely having the edge in terms of overall combat skill, since Natsu has shown the ability to properly map out entire battles mid-fight, and could even learn how to master sword fighting after only seeing it a few times. But on the other hand, a lot of that still stands as a major if. The big reason this battle stays a fight at all to me is because abilities like Future Sight or Conqueror's Coding have no inconsistency or what-if standard to them. We've already seen that on a massive island-wide scale in the Kaido fight, Luffy was capable of protecting his hands from making contact with instant one-shot fire. And while Natsu's pseudo-savant-esque ability to come up with fighting plans on the fly would help against almost anyone else, Luffy has his perfect counter in literally seeing his exact unpredictable moves before they ever happen. And not only does Natsu lack the precog to keep up, but he definitely can't use precog on events that haven't even happened yet like Luffy. So really, this encapsulates the whole fight to me. Sure, Natsu might be able to use his fire magic to negate Luffy's tune-infused durability, but Luffy definitely can punch through his dragon scales, since while they usually can stop lots of damage, they won't be doing him any favors here against Luffy's organ-smashing Haki. And while Natsu's bones and muscles would still be resilient due to the magic being infused into them, it wouldn't be nearly as much so as his defensive scales. And sure, Natsu has a way bigger variety of special moves, since Luffy basically only uses straight hands on an Itadori Jumpjutsu Kaizen sort of energy. But those wide variety of fire dragon roars, powerful demolition fists, and lake vaporizing passive heats might not even be able to affect Luffy, since his sun god Nika powers have already flipped massive fire attacks around on enemies before, which in Natsu's case would mean he's having the only kind of fire he can't eat blasted right back at him. And while sure, the most straightforward idea of saying Luffy's Gear 5 Nika hacks are protected by Haki, so that Mr. Goofy Luffy himself could just sort of Looney Tunes his way through Natsu, doesn't necessarily have to be the correct answer. The alternative option of Natsu being immune to the Nika powers or the concepts of Haki for an insta win of his own, just because he's shown the ability to burn other unburnable things before, such as Alderon's magic, Dark magic, or Zero's magic, isn't exactly any more of a clear, fair, or definable metric than two kids playing tag saying nuh-uh when they actually manage to catch each other to create that infinite loop of who's it. So saying all this, I think it should be sort of clear where I stand. While Natsu 100% has the toolkit and arsenal to win a fight against Luffy, because both of their higher end scaling comes down so much to inconsistent pixel scales and fan interpretations, I personally lean towards what we know as irrefutable, definitive facts. No matter how fast you think Natsu is, he'll never have future sight. No matter how durable those scales are, they aren't stopping Haki. And while yes, Natsu would obviously pull a win if you believe he can sear through the very concept of Nika, mold his flames into Luffy's exact weakness, or cause the literal heat death of the universe if the plot demands he must, once you remove the narrative handholding given to not just Natsu but almost every shonen protag, looking only at what they've actually shown us in universe, Natsu has vague enough limits that I'm not comfortable saying he could burn through the Haki-infused true imagination hacks of One Piece's most ridiculous power. But even if he could figure out a way to adapt to or match that reality warping ability, burning it away as he often does or even straight up negating it for a time, Luffy's potential ceiling is just as wide open and equally capable of being highballed into achieving the same new ludicrous powers mid-fight, be that making magical fire extinguishers, super soakers, or what have you. Whereas Natsu has had far more time with his flames for their abilities and limitations to become at least slightly more defined and developed, without ever even having a chance to mention that once their respective glamour and firepower runs out, Natsu is going to be the one left in a far weaker base form, which makes him a pretty clear non-factor relative to those world-destroying threats that both he and Luffy scale to on the higher end. Even if he did have to get a bit stronger to fight Alta Face, compared to Luffy, who like we said all the way back at the start, even in base, could clash with Hybrid Kaido, Tag Kizaru, and is often respected in his verse for hanging with characters way out of his weight class, in terms of both speed and durability, it's just not that close. So while this is undoubtedly one of the most even matches we've probably ever had on the channel, I think Luffy's far more consistent and adaptable toolkit makes up for the difference in Natsu's marginally better AP, due almost entirely to Natsu missing crucial game pieces like precog, and also having bad matchups against Luffy's hacks in general, which makes things like his dragon scales or straight hands mostly irrelevant. But with all that said, comment down below if you thought we did a good job with this one. I know despite all my best efforts researching and literal hours speaking into the microphone, my take will probably still end up hotter than the Aetherius and Elastic Sun powers put together. So thanks one last time for 1K subs. Be sure to check out one of the linked videos for me if you enjoyed this. And that's all for today. Thanks, everyone.